He was just a kid. The system saw a suspect, not a child. 1984, Burlington, North Carolina. A summer night. A quiet apartment complex. And a crime that would change two lives forever. When officers arrived, they were met by a terrified young woman, the survivor of an assault that shocked the town. She told police she'd studied her attacker's face, memorized every detail. And from that moment on, one memory would define the next decade of another person's life. Burlington was the kind of place that still felt small even when it grew. Factories hummed through the day, church bells marked the weekend. The local news rarely led with violence. But in the early 1980s, the racial divide of the South still lived quietly beneath the surface, present in schools, in hiring, and in policing. Ronald Cotton was a young black man working ordinary jobs, spending evenings with friends, sometimes fixing cars for extra money. He had no record, no history of aggression, and little reason to believe he'd ever come face to face with a courtroom. When word spread that a woman had been attacked in her apartment, fear settled over Burlington. The community wanted answers fast, and law enforcement felt the pressure. The survivor described her assailant in detail: dark complexion, short hair, slim build, a small mustache. Police artists worked with her for hours, producing a composite sketch. It was printed in newspapers and tacked onto bulletin boards around town. The public wanted to believe the image would lead to justice. But sketches are not photographs. They are approximations filtered through stress, fear, and memory. Among those who saw the sketch was Ronald Cotton. He thought it looked vaguely like him, but not enough to worry. He couldn't have imagined that the resemblance would soon rewrite his future. Days later, detectives brought Cotton in for questioning. He cooperated freely, confident he could clear up the confusion. He'd heard rumors about the assaults and wanted to help. After a short interview, officers asked him to stand in a photo lineup. In another room, the survivor studied several faces. Under fluorescent light, after hours of reliving trauma, she pointed to one picture, Ronald Cotton's. It felt like certainty. Investigators marked it down as fact. Eyewitness identification has long been one of the most persuasive forms of evidence in a courtroom, and one of the most fallible. But in 1984, DNA testing was science fiction. The human eye and memory were trusted above all else. The next day, police arrived at Cotton's home. He was calm, confused. He again insisted he was innocent. He gave a timeline, told them where he'd been, who he was with. But once a lineup match is made, the gears of prosecution rarely stop turning. Within hours, he was booked, photographed, and charged with 2 counts of rape and burglary. Local headlines carried his mugshot beside the sketch. For many readers, the case looked solved. Fear turned into relief. Someone was in custody. But for Ronald Cotton, that relief came at the cost of his freedom. Cotton sat in county jail for months awaiting his day in court. Letters from his family filled the silence. He told them not to worry, that the truth would come out. Meanwhile, investigators worked to link him to the second attack that had occurred nearby. 2 different cases, 2 different victims, but a similar description. Prosecutors moved to combine them, arguing the pattern was too close to ignore. For a young man barely out of his teens, it was overwhelming. The public defender assigned to him had little time and fewer resources. Still, Cotton held on to hope. He believed facts would matter. In early 1985, court opened in Alamance County. On one side sat the survivor, resolute and certain. On the other, Ronald Cotton, nervous, trying to understand how he'd become the face of a crime he didn't commit. The prosecution leaned heavily on eyewitness testimony. They emphasized her confidence, her composure, her courage. There was no physical evidence connecting Cotton to the crime scene. No fingerprints, no DNA, no definitive trace. But juries are human. They respond to emotion, to certainty. The survivor's unwavering identification carried the day. When defense counsel tried to introduce alibi witnesses, inconsistencies in time and distance created doubt. The prosecution reminded the jury, she looked him in the eye. She knows who did this. After only a few hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Guilty on all counts. Cotton's mother wept in the gallery. He stood frozen, hearing the sentence, life in prison plus 50 years. The courtroom buzzed with closure. For the survivor, justice seemed served. For Cotton, the world fell silent. Months later, an inmate bragged about committing the same assaults. That man was Bobby Poole, already in the same prison system. Cotton recognized him, saw the resemblance, and alerted authorities. His claim triggered a new trial in 1987. Both men were placed side by side before the survivor. Trauma and memory are powerful, she again identified Cotton. The new trial doubled down on the original verdict. 2 sentences now stood between him and freedom. He entered the North Carolina prison system at barely 20 years old. The days blended together, gray walls, work detail, the slow erosion of time. He kept a Bible, letters from family, and the stubborn belief that someday, somehow, the truth would surface. Every appeal failed. Each legal rejection felt like another lock clicking shut. Outside the walls, technology was changing. By the early 1990s, DNA testing began overturning convictions once thought ironclad. Inmates across the country sought access to old evidence for testing. Ronald Cotton wrote letter after letter, asking lawyers, journalists, anyone who would listen. Finally, the case reached the attention of the newly formed Innocence Project. They located the preserved biological samples from the assaults, samples never previously tested. While scientists examined the evidence, Cotton waited. Weeks passed, then months. He'd imagined this moment for years, the possibility of scientific proof. He feared it too. What if something went wrong? What if even DNA couldn't undo the system's mistake? Late 1994. The results were ready. Forensic analysis showed the DNA from the crime scene belonged not to Ronald Cotton, but to another man already serving time, Bobby Poole, the inmate who had once boasted of his guilt. The tests were clear. The truth had finally spoken. But the decision wasn't yet official. The court still had to hear the motion. After more than 10 years behind bars, the evidence that could free him waited inside a sealed envelope. And when it was opened, the state of North Carolina would have to decide, do we correct a mistake, or protect a conviction? For more than a decade, one envelope held the power to undo years of pain. Inside it, proof that the man North Carolina had called a monster was innocent. This is what happens when science collides with a system built on certainty. Ronald Cotton entered prison a teenager and grew into adulthood behind concrete walls. Days started before dawn. Roll call, work detail, count. He watched cellmates leave for parole, others return in chains. Hope came in letters from his mother, sometimes a worn photograph of the world outside. He refused to let anger define him. He read law books, studied faith, learned patience. Still, each appeal that failed reminded him how small one man can feel against the machinery of justice. In the late 1980s, fate placed another prisoner in the same facility, Bobby Poole. Whispers followed him. He brags about those assaults, the ones Cotton's in for. Ronald confronted him once in the cafeteria. Poole smiled, said nothing. Guards broke it up before it turned violent. Word reached prison staff, but no one investigated further. To them it was inmate gossip. To Cotton it was torment, proof hiding in plain sight. By 1994, a small legal nonprofit in New York, the Innocence Project, was beginning to use DNA to challenge wrongful convictions. A volunteer attorney read Cotton's letter and noticed a crucial line: the evidence from both assaults still existed. Most old cases had long since lost their samples. Cotton's had not. They contacted local officials, filed a motion for testing, and shipped the evidence to a state lab. 4 months, Cotton waited, half believing, half terrified. When the report finally arrived, the results were undeniable. The DNA matched Bobby Poole. None of it matched Ronald Cotton. The prosecutor who'd once argued for life imprisonment now stood in court and admitted the mistake. After 11 years behind bars, Ronald Cotton was exonerated. The judge's words were simple: you are free to go. But freedom, after a decade lost, doesn't come with instructions. Cotton stepped outside to cameras, family, and air that felt too wide. He hugged his mother, her hair now streaked gray, and promised he'd start over. Reporters asked how he felt. His answer was quiet: I just want to live. He found work in a factory, rented a small apartment, and tried to adjust to the noise of ordinary life. Yet the question never left him. What happens to a man the world called guilty, even after he's proven innocent? Years later, a letter arrived from Jennifer Thompson, the survivor who had identified him. She'd learned of the DNA results and wanted to meet. They met in a church office in 1997. No cameras, no lawyers, just two people bound by the worst mistake imaginable. She cried, he listened. When she finished apologizing, Cotton said, "I forgive you." That moment, documented later in their joint memoir Picking Cotton, became a symbol of human grace in the shadow of systemic failure. Their story drew national attention. It helped shape eyewitness identification reforms across the U.S. Double-blind lineups, clearer instructions, recorded procedures. Cotton spoke at universities and police academies, reminding officers that memory isn't evidence, it's interpretation. He used his life to argue for the people still waiting for DNA to speak their truth. Freedom didn't erase the missing years. At 50, Cotton admitted the hardest part was realizing the world had moved on without him. Friends had married, technology had changed, entire eras had passed. He'd lost birthdays, funerals, and the ordinary rhythm of living. Still, he refused bitterness. He said, "If I carry hate, then they still own me." His exoneration became a landmark example for criminal justice advocates. North Carolina created compensation laws for the wrongfully convicted and expanded post-conviction DNA testing. Each new exoneration carried echoes of Ronald Cotton's case, a reminder that justice can make mistakes, but also corrections. He was 17 when the state took his freedom, 50 when it gave it back. Between those years lived a lesson we're still learning, that certainty is not truth, and forgiveness can be the most radical form of justice. Ronald Cotton and Jennifer Thompson now work together speaking about wrongful convictions. Their friendship doesn't rewrite history, but it does rewrite what humanity can look like after it. If stories like this move you, subscribe to this channel. Every week we explore real lives caught between injustice and redemption, stories that remind us truth always finds its way. Ronald Cotton's name became more than a headline, it became a warning. Because if one man could lose a decade to mistaken identity, how many others still wait unseen? The exoneration didn't end when Cotton walked free. It started a ripple that touched the core of America's justice system. Law schools studied the case. Police departments began retraining officers on photo lineup methods. States reviewed policies that had been untouched for decades. In North Carolina, legislators introduced laws to reform eyewitness identification, the very procedure that had sealed Cotton's fate years earlier. What had been a tragedy became the blueprint for change. The 1990s marked the rise of DNA evidence in American courts. Cotton's case, among the earliest high-profile DNA exonerations, forced prosecutors and defense attorneys alike to re-evaluate old convictions. Between 1989 and 2000, more than 60 wrongfully convicted individuals were freed nationwide. Scientists began testifying about memory contamination, how stress, fear, and leading questions alter what people think they saw. For the first time, the legal system faced a painful truth. Eyewitnesses can be honest and still be wrong. Cotton rebuilt slowly. He found peace in simplicity, family gatherings, volunteer work, public speaking. He didn't chase fame, he chased purpose. He joined advocacy groups like the Innocence Project and the Center on Actual Innocence at the University of North Carolina. When he stood before new recruits at police academies, he didn't speak with anger. He spoke of procedure, accountability, and the quiet cost of negligence. If I could be mistaken for someone else, he'd say, then anyone could. The survivor's life changed too. She became a vocal advocate for reform, urging caution in every lineup and conviction review. Together, Cotton and the survivor co-authored Picking Cotton, a memoir recounting how tragedy became reconciliation. Their joint lectures drew thousands. Students, officers, and judges listened as two people who once faced each other in court now stood side by side. Proof that forgiveness can be stronger than fear. Every exoneration tells two stories, the loss of years and the echo that lingers afterward. Cotton once said freedom felt like being dropped into a world that had moved on without me. He had to learn the internet, credit cards, the sound of silence without bars. He struggled to trust, to plan, to sleep through the night. The state compensated him financially, but no amount could balance the weight of absence. The birthdays missed, the seasons unseen. After Cotton's case, North Carolina established its actual Innocence Commission, one of the first of its kind in the United States. It allowed new evidence of innocence to be reviewed even after appeals had ended. The commission's influence spread. Other states followed. By the early 2000s, dozens of old cases reopened. Each new exoneration whispered the same question: how many more? Behind every policy reform, there's a human heartbeat. Ronald Cotton's name appeared in textbooks, court seminars, documentaries, but he remained grounded. When asked what kept him going, he said, "The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be heard." That simplicity resonated far beyond one state. It reminded a nation that justice is not a fixed thing, it's something we have to keep building. Fade in, Cotton walking along a quiet road at sunset, hands in pockets. "I used to think freedom meant walking outside," he once said. "Now I know it means forgiveness." He and the survivor continued speaking together until health slowed him down. Their friendship became a symbol studied around the world, not of perfection, but of redemption. He entered prison as a teenager, left as a man, and became a teacher to a system that once condemned him. His story is not about vengeance, it's about vision. Because when truth meets courage, the past can't hold the future hostage. Soft piano and ambient city sounds rise under the narration. Ronald Cotton's legacy reminds us that justice isn't just about verdicts. It's about humility, the ability to say, "We were wrong," and the grace to listen before it happens again. If this story moved you, share it, not for views but for awareness. And subscribe to Black Crime Tape, True Crime, for more stories that challenge what we think we know about guilt, innocence, and the people caught in between.